Moving day rarely goes smoothly, but I had convinced myself this one would. The plan was straightforward. Pack the truck, drive across town, unload boxes, and maybe collapse into bed surrounded by unpacked chaos. That was the expectation. That was the dream. But fate, or perhaps the suburban gods, had other plans. Before the tape on my boxes had even fully dried, before the first mug could be unpacked from its newspaper cocoon, I found myself face to face with the first curveball of Maple Ridge, Paula Hargrove. It was hot, a sticky afternoon where packing tape clung to my fingers like spider webs. I had just wrestled a cardboard box marked kitchen, fragile, into my garage when she materialized, not walking up the driveway like a neighbor with cookies, but standing square in the path of my doorway like a checkpoint guard. She wore a pressed navy blazer that looked airbrushed into place, her hair sculpted into a shape that didn't waver despite the heat. In her arms, she clutched a binder so thick it could double as a defensive weapon or a doorstop for a courthouse. Her expression wasn't welcome to the neighborhood warmth. It was part suspicion, part entitlement, like she had been waiting all morning for her moment of authority. "Excuse me, are you the new resident?" she asked. It came out less as a question and more as an accusation, like she was interrogating me for sneaking into her city. I shifted the weight of the box in my arms. "Yeah, Evan Carter. Just moved in." I tried to step around her, careful with the box that felt like it was seconds from splitting. Paula matched my movement perfectly, sliding in front of me so I had no choice but to stop. The oppressive sun pressed into my back, but her gaze felt even heavier. "I'm Paula Hargrove, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your compliance status immediately." Her words snapped across the driveway with rehearsed confidence. Before I could even respond, she shoved a piece of paper into my chest. Faced with a choice between saving my fragile box or catching her notice, I hesitated for a fraction too long, and gravity laughed in my face. The box tilted. The cast iron pan inside toppled and hit the garage floor with a clang so loud it echoed, announcing my arrival to every neighbor within 3 houses. The sound seemed to fuel her fire. Paula's posture straightened like she'd caught me committing a federal crime. Noise violations. Disruptive moving practices. This is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. If we don't maintain uniformity and order, the entire community will fall apart. She reached into that binder and produced another weapon, a thick blue compliance manual with gold lettering. She cradled it like scripture. "Welcome," she said, oddly prim as she thrust it at me. The compliance binder. "You have 30 days to review and sign acknowledgement of all community standards, or you'll face daily fines beginning immediately at $50. Each week of non-compliance doubles the fine." Out of reflex, I caught the binder, nearly dropping it straight to the ground. Good grief. It was heavier than my college textbooks and about as warm as a cinder block straight from the sun. I flipped through it. Pages upon pages of cramped rules about lawn height, mailbox color palettes, paint tones for shutters, approved landscaping, and even operational quiet hours that read more like an airport ordinance than a residential community. I muttered, "This thing is thicker than a bridge construction manual." Paula mistook my remark for admiration and nodded proudly. "We pride ourselves on comprehensive standards. Every successful neighborhood requires structure." Still holding the binder, I raised an eyebrow. "Show me where my deed mentions any of this." Because I looked. Property law seems pretty quiet on mailbox paint. Her composure flickered. For the first time, she hesitated. "Your deed is irrelevant." The words spilled too fast, too defensive. Property ownership comes with community responsibilities. Every property here falls under HOA jurisdiction. That's why planned communities work. She hugged her own folder closer as if sheer proximity to laminated rules gave her strength. Inside, I almost laughed. Outside, I kept my face neutral. On my toolbox behind me sat the laser pointer I'd tossed there after my last work presentation. The light caught it, sending a little red dot dancing across the garage wall. Paula's eyes darted to it for a microsecond, and I caught the tell, the poker face slipping. The Confident Authority Act wasn't as airtight as she wanted me to believe. "Look," I said evenly, lifting the cast iron pan with one hand and holding the ridiculous binder with the other. "Maybe we figure out whether your rules actually apply to my house before threatening me with $50 a day fines. That sound reasonable?" Her face flushed several shades too quickly, landing firmly in stop sign red. "Mr. Carter, you don't understand the seriousness of this situation." Community standards exist for a reason. Property values, neighborhood character, cohesion, these things matter. And I will be monitoring your compliance status very closely, daily. With that, she turned on her heel, stomping down the driveway like a general who believed she had just won the first battle of a war, but not before she hissed one last glance down at my red dot laser pointer. I stood in my garage alone again, one hand gripping the frying pan that felt solid and useful, the other still weighed down by this mammoth binder of bureaucratic theater. Through the open door, I saw her across the street, already animatedly whispering to another resident, gesturing toward my house and pointing with that same clipboard. I exhaled slowly, the paper notice she'd dropped still lying crumpled by my feet. The bold red vacate stamp looked fresh. Too fresh, almost like it had been applied minutes earlier specifically for theatrical effect. I folded it into my pocket. Something in my gut told me this was only round one, that Paula Hargrove wasn't used to being challenged, and she wouldn't take kindly to resistance. Moving day was supposed to be about boxes, sweat, and maybe pizza delivery. Instead, I was holding a frying pan in one hand, a compliance Bible in the other, and realizing my new neighborhood conflict had started before the truck was even empty. 3 days after Paula ambushed me on moving day with her binder and bogus fines, my garage no longer looked like a place for unpacking boxes. It had become a command post. On the wall, I pinned up a county plat map I'd printed from the assessor's office, complete with crisp red lines showing boundaries. My phone sat ready, permanently open to a property boundary app that could throw digital proof on screen in seconds, and on the workbench my so-called weapons were lined up neatly. A laser pointer from an old work presentation, a box of thick street chalk meant for a driveway project, and the blue binder Paula had shoved at me, heavier than law itself, lighter than actual authority. The more she pushed, the more I realized this wasn't about reading rules. This was about control, and she wasn't finished. That morning I heard a low hum of voices outside. Peering out through the open garage door, I saw Paula again, this time flanked by a small troop of volunteers, matching clipboards in hand, identical plastic name tags pinned to their shirts, HOA Volunteer Team, uniforms of suburban soldiers. They were moving yard to yard like a patrol unit, inspecting trash bins, jotting furiously, and slapping bright yellow stickers that read, "Compliance Standards Reminder," on any surface they liked. When they reached my driveway, one volunteer pressed a sticker onto my trash bin, pursing his lips like he'd just stamped a passport. Paula beamed as if she'd brought order to chaos. "Neighborhood Unity Survey," Paula announced loudly enough for nearby porches to hear, waving her clipboard like it was deputized authority. "We're documenting concerns about the non-compliant newcomer and his impact on community standards." Mrs. Peterson, my neighbor to the right, stepped onto her porch, clutching a watering can. Paula turned, pen already scratching onto her clipboard. "Have you noticed disruptions from Mr. Carter?" Mrs. Peterson hesitated, eyes darting to me in the garage. I haven't really noticed any problems," she said gently. Paula's smile didn't falter. "Disruption patterns often emerge gradually," she replied, scribbling notes anyway. "Early intervention is key." The way she said it made it sound like I was a contagious disease. I'd had enough. I stepped forward, phone in hand, app glowing with red boundary lines. "Morning, everyone," I called out with a casual nod. "So it looks like you're all interested in property boundaries today." Perfect timing. The volunteer team froze mid-stride, deer in the headlights. But Paula stepped up, chin raised, voice sharp. "Mr. Carter, this is official HOA business. Please return to your property immediately." "Funny you mentioned property," I said, holding up a folded sheet I'd retrieved from Paula's binder the other day after she dropped it in my garage. "Anyone want to see what she's been passing around?" I laid it flat across my toolbox under the glare of a single bulb. The bold header screamed, "Petition to remove non-compliant resident." Neighbors leaning out from porches craned their necks. Mrs. Peterson walked closer, her watering can forgotten, reading the document aloud. "But she drafted this before you even moved in," she said, voice tightening. Murmurs rippled through the small group. Phones lifted, snapping pictures. Paula lunged to grab the petition, her voice cracking for the first time. "This isn't official, it's a preliminary community feedback draft." But the damage was done. "Looks less like community standards," I said evenly. and more like someone inventing authority out of thin air. Instead of lines on a phone screen, I showed the crowd the large plat hung proudly on my garage wall. Real county seals, real legal descriptions. Anyone who wants to see the official property boundaries is welcome, I offered. 3 neighbors accepted, filing into the garage. Mr. Peterson ran his finger along the red lines. He compared the phone app with the county plat. So the red line matches exactly, which means you're not in the HOA jurisdiction at all. He said it aloud, and the truth spread like fire through tinder. More neighbors trickled over. Word was spreading faster than Paula could silence it. The garage filled, not with boxes, but with residents inspecting maps. Paula tried regaining control, raising her shrill voice. This divisive behavior is exactly why we need stronger compliance measures. But her words bounced weakly off the simple weight of red boundary lines. Then Lena Brooks, quiet, watchful, and known in town for working with legal documents, stepped forward. She crouched, studied the plat map with exacting calm, and straightened up. "These are county records," she said firmly. "If his property is outside the HOA, Paula, you don't have any authority here." Her words hit harder than anything I could have said. Authority, from the actual legal professional, not the clipboard queen. Paula's face cycled rapidly, anger, confusion, panic, before landing on a shaky attempt at bravado. "Authority is established through community consensus, not outdated property maps." It was her final fallback. Thin, weak, transparent. One by one, the volunteers peeled off. Some slipped away entirely. Others joined the curious cluster around my map. Neighbors were already opening their phones, downloading the same app, questioning their own property lines. A quiet revolution of realization was underway, and Paula had no control over it. Mrs. Peterson muttered the math aloud. 15 years of dues, times 12 months, times the whole street. She went pale. The numbers exposed themselves now. Money poured into an HOA that maybe didn't even cover the land it claimed. By the time Paula spat out, "This conversation is over," no one was listening. They were busy poring over deeds, scanning county maps, murmuring with suspicion. Paula marched off, speed dialing someone furiously on her phone, her heels sharp against the pavement. But not before I caught a brief snap of fear crossing her face, an expression that gave away what her voice denied. She wasn't losing an argument. She was losing control. The garage, once stacked with boxes, now felt like a courtroom or maybe even a classroom. People lingered, whispering, comparing property IDs. "Thanks for the education session," Mr. Peterson said solemnly. That's when I realized Paula thought her binder was the weapon, but in truth the map was the blade. And I'd just drawn the first cut. The first week after exposing Paula's fraudulent petition and boundaries, things went unusually quiet on Maple Street. Too quiet. Anyone who's ever been through neighborhood politics knows that silence is less a retreat than a reload. And sure enough, the next Tuesday morning, the sound of the trash truck rumbling down the block revealed just how far Paula was willing to go to claw back control. I watched from my bedroom window as the big green, Flynn environmental truck rolled past every house, picking up bin after bin with its clunky robotic arm. Every house except mine. My bin sat at the curb, same as the others, but the truck never slowed. The driver looked straight ahead, pushed the hydraulic lever to lower the arm after Mrs. Peterson's bin, and drove right on by, leaving mine standing upright, full, and mocking. At first I thought I was imagining things. Maybe the driver would circle back. But 10 minutes later, plastic bags began to lift from the overstuffed container, wind catching them like kites of shame. A wet bag of spent coffee grounds tore open mid-flight, splattering itself all over Mrs. Peterson's immaculate driveway before exploding into brown debris. Another bag bounced into the Hendersons' rose bushes, flapping like a surrender flag. My clumsy chase after them only made the scene worse. Pajama pants, slippers, darting between yards trying to wrestle rogue trash bags while neighbors peeked out their blinds. To her credit, Mrs. Peterson emerged with a roll of paper towels and helped me clean her driveway, muttering, "This isn't your fault," with quiet solidarity. Still, it was hard to shake the sting of being deliberately humiliated. Sure enough, by the time I wheeled the still full bin back up the driveway, something was wedged under my windshield wiper. A Flynn environmental receipt with a handwritten note, HOA authorized modification. The date? Yesterday. The handwriting? Neat, flowery, suspiciously similar to Paula's. I called the number on the slip, expecting a customer service maze. Instead, Derek Flynn himself, the owner, answered on the first ring. He sounded rehearsed. "Yeah, we had to modify your route due to HOA compliance issues. Temporary service suspension until resolved." "What issues?" I asked flatly. "Property compliance violations. The HOA president flagged it." He rattled off the words mechanically, straight off a script he'd clearly used before with other unlucky residents. "Derek, can you send me the dispatcher notes proving this?" I pressed. There was a pause, then reluctant tapping at a keyboard. "Sure, I'll email them over." When the file arrived an hour later, it confirmed my suspicion. Paula had called claiming full street authorization. She gave him a list of addresses, half of which turned out to be outside HOA jurisdiction entirely. Derek authorized the skip without cross-checking anything. Basically, he'd taken Paula's word as gospel when she didn't have a legal hymn to, saying that's when I started a folder on my desktop titled HOA Overreach. Documentation, something, told me it wouldn't be thin, but Paula wasn't. Done with reputational warfare. By Friday, a flatbed pulled up carrying a gleaming prefab mailbox cluster, the kind used in apartment complexes. The crew started unloading tools directly in front of my standalone mailbox, like I had been demoted from homeowner to P.O. box renter overnight. Paula sat in her car a half-block away, engine idling, clipboard balanced on her knees like she was waiting to autograph the title to my soul. When I stepped outside, one of the installers thrust a work order at me. Community mailbox standardization approved by HOA. The paper looked official enough, stamped but suspiciously dated just days after Paula lost credibility in my garage. "My mailbox works fine," I told them. "Sorry, sir. Everybody has to transition." And that's when I remembered something Paula clearly hadn't. Mailboxes aren't HOA property. They're federal property. Tampering with one is a crime under U.S. law. HOA rules stop where the eagle emblem begins. I called the local post office. Within an hour, the postmaster himself arrived in full uniform, badge gleaming in the bright morning sun. He walked past Paula, who scurried from her car now wearing a reflective vest, and surveyed the half-assembled cluster. He let the silence build before speaking like a man accustomed to courtrooms and vows. "Ma'am, unauthorized modification of mail systems is a federal offense. HOA has no authority here, none whatsoever." Then, to make the point clear, he slapped a bright red federal violation notice directly onto Paula's clipboard. It fluttered in the breeze for everyone to see. Neighbors gasped. Someone clapped. Even one of Paula's volunteers muttered, "Oh boy," before slinking away. The postmaster wasn't done. He walked over to my original mailbox, which had been awkwardly jammed into the cluster slots, and shook his head. "This is non-compliant with postal standards. We'll restore the original box immediately." He dug into his official pack, pulled an eagle-emblazoned sticker, and firmly pressed it onto my box. The words beneath the emblem read, "Tampering with mail delivery systems is a federal crime." The sticker might as well have been steel armor. The crowd saw it glowing in the afternoon sun, a literal symbol of authority that Paula couldn't touch. Paula, clipboard still trembling, sputtered something about community harmony and neighborhood coherence, but the sound of her voice was hollow, drowned out by neighbors murmuring, "Federal trumped fiction." The postal chief tipped his hat at me on his way back to the truck. "Call us if anyone touches this again, sir. We don't play games with mail." Paula lingered, her face pale. Her army gone, her authority trampled, she pointed feebly at me. "This isn't over, Mr. Carter." But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. She turned and marched back to her idling car, her clipboard now scarred with the red violation notice she couldn't tear away fast enough. That evening, I stood in my driveway sipping a cold drink, watching the eagle sticker catch the last golden glow of daylight. Trash might pile, clipboards might shuffle, but this was different. This wasn't community theater. This was federal law. And for once, the only binder that mattered wasn't Paula's. It was the U.S. Code. After the trash fiasco and the mailbox humiliation, Paula disappeared for a few days. At first, I thought maybe the federal violation notice had scared her into retreat. But in reality, she had just retreated into the shadows to reload. If the binder and fines couldn't control me, if the mailbox gambit ended with a postal eagle stamped against her clipboard, she needed a new weapon. And that weapon was fear. Specifically the kind that makes people clutch their wallets and see dollar signs bleeding away from their property values. It started with whispers at the coffee shop. "Did you hear non-compliant homes drag down neighboring values by 10%? One woman murmured within earshot. By evening, Lena knocked on my door with 2 cups of coffee and a warning look. "Paula's been going door to door," she said, glancing around nervously. "She's telling people your refusal to obey the standards could cost them thousands. She's quoting property value drops and market instability, like she's a real estate analyst." I wasn't surprised. Fear of losing money is the HOA boogeyman weapon. But Paula had underestimated one thing. Mrs. Peterson lives for research. By the next day, she was sitting at her kitchen counter, surrounded by printouts from the county assessor and online studies. She waved me over like she'd discovered buried treasure. "Evan, listen. I checked sales records. Non-HOA homes appreciate faster, or at least just as fast, because buyers love the freedom and lack of fees. Paula's warnings are completely backwards." Her enthusiasm spread through sentences as she read, "HOA fees never decrease. Special assessments go up. Non-HOA properties actually sell quicker because buyers avoid the drama." Armed with Peterson's research, I called 3 local agents to make sure. Their responses were flat, professional, unanimous. "Actually," one said, "I steer clients toward non-HOA houses because the fees make conventional homes harder to sell." Another agent laughed. "HOA properties scare buyers off, lane fees, rules, board politics. Non-HOA freedom, they pay more for that." Paula's house-to-house statistics sounded flimsy next to verified sales data, but she didn't quit. If her door-to-door dread campaign failed, she had another tactic: the internet. 2 days later, Mr. Henderson arrived at my porch, holding his phone as though it were infected. "Evan, you need to see this." On the screen was a Facebook-style private group, Concerned Maple Street Residents. Paula had created it the day before. Posts filled the page. Grainy pictures of my house taken from suspicious angles. Captions like "deteriorating property standards spreading" and "visual blight reducing community character." The problem wasn't just the captions, it was the accounts posting them. Henderson scrolled down. "Look at the usernames. Every one of them had been created last week. Same grammar quirks, same style, fake accounts." Paula had essentially built an audience of sock puppets to make her narrative look bigger than it was. "Send me the screenshots," I told Henderson. That night, they joined the growing evidence wall in my garage. The red plat map was pinned dead center, and around it hung photos of her forged petition, the trash service receipt, the postmaster notice, and now, Paula's fake online army, highlighted with neon yellow marker that made their identical writing patterns obvious from 3 feet away. It looked less like a garage and more like a war room. Neighbors started stopping by, shaking their heads at the absurdity of Paula's scheme and muttering the same refrain. She built fake followers to fool us all. But then Sophie sent me the real punch. Photos of receipts, payment schedules, even text messages between Paula and her contractor relatives boasting about milking the environmental angle for all it's worth. The language was clear, tactical, deliberate. They weren't protecting the community. They were engineering extortion. "Keep the pressure up until he caves," one message read. Another, "If we push property value fears, they'll side with us." Yet it wasn't just fraud that shook me. It was trespass, because the metadata on those surveillance photos of my property showed they were taken at times when I was at work. Heather, or her minions, had been stepping onto my property, cameras in hand, snooping for dirt to twist into proof. It wasn't just HOA theater anymore. It was stalking. It was invasive. A line had been crossed, not moral, not ethical, but legal. The neighbors began to steer away from Paula's spiral. Peterson went house to house, folder in hand, showing her research like gospel. Henderson pulled up her fake group on his phone during casual conversations. "You know half those commenters don't exist, right?" he asked one of her supporters. And the murmurs turned into realization. Paula's panic showed through her performance. She couldn't stand still anymore, always on the phone, typing furiously, driving around the block taking pictures like she was documenting a crime scene. But each frantic escalation left another breadcrumb trail of desperation. With every false claim and fake account, she only proved one thing. Her authority was paper-thin, exposed under the weight of real facts and federal violations already stacked against her. I knew then that she wasn't planning retreat. No, Paula was gearing up for her last stand. She was crafting petitions calling for an emergency meeting, desperate to force signatures that would prop her collapsing image. Her binder wasn't working. Her scare tactics were failing, and soon, she'd learned that neighbors who had once whispered and nodded were now leaning toward the truth, because they'd seen the receipts, the maps, the data. And for the first time since moving in, I felt less like the outsider and more like the neighbor teaching a hard lesson. Bullies don't need to be shouted down. They collapse on their own, the second the facts are louder than the fiction. By the time Paula announced her emergency neighborhood meeting, the entire street felt like it was holding its breath. Flyers slipped under doors, bold language about saving property values and urgent community enforcement. She worded it carefully, deliberately vague on the specifics, but the intention was obvious. She was trying to create one last stand, a Hail Mary petition campaign designed to paint me, a lawful homeowner, as the existential threat to Maple Ridge. For Paula, backed into a corner after weeks of evidence piling against her, this was trench warfare with a clipboard. The community center smelled faintly of dust and old carpet when I walked in that night, binders of my own evidence tucked beneath my arm. Paula had staged the room like a courtroom, folding chairs arranged into neat rows, a podium at the front, and poster boards propped on an easel with splashy graphs she'd cobbled together. At least 15 neighbors had shown, half curious, half weary, some still undecided. Her loyalists sat obediently in the front row, George Miller included, pen already scratching on a yellow legal pad. Others, like Sophie and the Petersons, hung back, arms crossed, expressions skeptical. Paula began with all the flourish of a politician. Ladies and gentlemen, our community faces unprecedented challenges from a non-compliant resident refusing to uphold our shared standards. If this behavior continues, our property values will plummet, and Maple Ridge will descend into chaos. She gestured to the first chart with a dramatic flourish. The flimsy cardboard shook under her hand. Photos followed, the same ones I had already debunked, blown up for theatricality. Trash bags from the week she arranged a Flynn skip, weeds highlighted with red circles, my garage at odd angles clearly shot when I wasn't home. She passed a petition clipboard down the front row. The headline read in bold, "Protect our neighborhood's investment." The murmurs started low among the middle rows. They weren't signing. They were reading. Mrs. Peterson was the first to speak up. What legal authority does this petition grant exactly? And who would hold that authority? Paula faltered. Well, the HOA president, of course. I caught Sophie's smile from across the room. The question Paula feared was finally in the air. That's when I stood, clicked my laser pointer, and projected my own first slide onto the bare wall opposite her charts. The certified county plat map of my property filled the space with bright lines and official seals. This, I said, my voice cutting into the rising tension, is actual authority. County recorded, sealed, undisputed. According to these records, my property lies completely outside HOA jurisdiction. Gasps shuffled through the rows. People leaned forward to see the seals clearly. Then I flipped to the second slide, scans of the dispatcher notes from Flynn Environmental, proving Paula had falsely claimed authority over the entire street to stop my trash pickup. A few eyes turned to George, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Then came the receipt Sophie had collected, line item charges for environmental work, that ended up as Paula's sprinkler system and landscaping. The final blow was the metadata stamped under her photos of my property, timestamps proving they were taken while I was at work. That's trespass, not governance, not stewardship, trespass, and fraud. The silence broke when Mr. Henderson spoke loudly from the middle row. We all trusted you, Paula, and you've been lying. Heads nodded. Neighbors muttered in agreement. And then, as if on cue, a uniformed planning official stepped into the room, orange survey stakes under his arm. Maple Ridge has been reviewed, he announced firmly. Boundary verification shows Mr. Carter's property lies completely outside HOA jurisdiction. Official documentation will be posted by morning. He handed me a laminated form, stamped brightly with the municipal seal. Boundary verified. Outside HOA. That was the moment everything collapsed. The petition clipboard stalled halfway down the row, abandoned on an empty chair. Paula's charts looked flimsy next to embossed seals and city survey tools. Even George set his pen down. Paula tried a final plea about neighborhood consensus and the good of the whole, but her words bled desperation. Neighbors weren't nodding anymore. They were folding arms, shaking heads, pulling out phones to snap photos of the laminated form. Paula's mask cracked fully, her cheeks flushed crimson, voice shrill. "Legal technicalities shouldn't override community needs," she snapped. But Mrs. Peterson replied coolly, "Paula, legal technicalities are called laws." A ripple of laughter and relieved applause spread through the crowd. It was over. The next morning, the city survey crew installed a reflective plaque at the edge of my yard. It read simply, "Survey completed. Outside HOA jurisdiction." It gleamed in the sun like a shield. Neighbors walked by snapping photos of it, shaking heads at how one person's obsession with authority had spiraled into weeks of chaos. Paula watched from her house across the street, phone clutched in her hand, her clipboard gone. By evening, Lena reported the HOA board had called an emergency session. Paula was voted out of her presidency, personally liable for fines and violations, including federal charges from the Postal Service fiasco. As the dust settled, the neighborhood seemed lighter. Sophie brought over coffee and smiled. Sometimes the truth just needs a louder microphone. The Petersons left cookies on my porch with a note. "Thanks for reminding us property law isn't optional." The orange survey stake caught the evening light like a tiny flag declaring victory without noise. Without shouting, just with receipts and the weight of actual law. For weeks, Paula strutted with binders, clipboards, and scare tactics. But in the end, all it took was a map, a survey, and one laminated piece of truth to remind everyone. Her authority was paper-thin. Mine was rooted in law, and that difference turned the neighbor who was supposed to be bullied into the neighbor, who taught the rest how to fight back.